So it says here George Washington was the founding father of the United States, right? We know the story, right? But he was a slave owner who became uneasy with the institution of slavery, it says here, right? But provided for the emancipation of his slaves only after death. So he didn't care. He only freed, I think, only one of them after when he died. Just want to show you something. So I googled George Washington slave owner, as you can see here, and these are the images I get. So let me just show you one real quick. All right, so you see this? Oh yeah, he had Negro slaves, right? This is the picture they always want to paint to us, right? A white man and a black man as a slave. A white man master, black man as a slave, all right? Got Dodge the Hijack. Here's another one right here. Zoom into this one. As you can see, again, they try to show a white master and a bunch of colored people as servants and slaves. So they show us a lot of portraits and drawings of George Washington, right? This is one of them. Right, so in this portrait, there's like a Moor right behind him, as you can see. Some say that's William Lee, his servant. But we don't know, is that really George Washington right here? Or who's George Washington? Or is that his advisor? There's some say this is his Moroccan advisor. That's what, they say, that this is his Moroccan advisor, actually. All right, we're in the book. It says here, George Washington, a biography by Douglas Southall Freeman, Volume 2. This is from 1948, page 239 of this book, searched by the colonel, and the Martian was to no purpose. The man had disappeared. Loudon had then to attempt to identify Pierre Fidel on the basis of Van Horn's description, added to what the traitor had said casually in his letter of himself and of his military position. What tall, dark officer was there in America, 38 years of age, unmarried, who had eyed the camp and was going to participate in the expedition against Fort Duquesne? The only officer who was known to Lord Loudon's informants as in any way answering to this description was Colonel Washington, George Washington, who was what tall, dark officer? Tall and dark. Washington. He was single. He had an aide. He was to share in the next march to the Ohio. As it changed, Lord Loudon had close at hand Captain David Kennedy, who had seen Washington in New York in March 1756, when the colonel was returning from the visit to General Shirley in Boston. Loudon consequently asked Kennedy for a description of the Virginian. All right, they're talking about George Washington. Washington said the captain was a man about 6 feet, of a black complexion, again, a black complexion with black hair, which he then wore in a bag. Looks like a foreigner, a strong man. Kennedy remembered Washington's companions, Mercer and Stewart, and recalled that Washington's uniform was blue, faced with red and laced, right? Black complexions, so-called black complexions, right? So when they mean dark, they do mean black, so-called black, dark complexion, so-called Negro, right? Remember, he is a descendant of a Huguenot. He does have Moorish blood, so this makes sense, right? Just want to show you guys again. I'm going to start with Nicholas Marteau, the Huguenot, right? Nicholas Marteau, the Huguenot. It says passenger and immigration list, 1500s, 1900s. Nicholas Marteau, a primary immigrant, arrival place Virginia, 1620. Wow, 1620, right? What are they doing? It says here the trail of the Huguenots in Europe. The Huguenots in Europe. So George Washington's Moorish ancestor, Huguenot ancestor. And we go down through his daughter Elizabeth Marteau, who married George Reed. And they together had Mildred Reed, who married Colonel Warner Jr. The Warners and the Reeds got together, and they had Mildred Warner together, who married Lawrence Washington, who was coming from John Washington and Anne Pope. John was the first one, remember? And then we got Lawrence and their family coming out of England, as it says here, the Sulgrave Manor. That's where their old Wessington house was. So then Lawrence Washington and Mildred Warner, they had Augustine Washington, who got with Mary Ball, and together they had President George Washington, and he married Martha Danbridge. Now we're gonna get a description of Martha Danbridge. You guys are gonna see what she was physically described as. I'm gonna show you that she was also a dark complexion. So on his mom's side, Mary Ball, her dad, Colonel Joseph Mataos Ball, George Washington's grandfather, and Mary Bennett. Remember the Bennett name? That's a Sephardic Jewish name. Sephardic Jewish name. So now we know through his mom's side, he does have also Sephardic Jewish Moorish blood. All right, continuing with George Washington again. So we got, he has Moorish blood. We know the Welsh, the English, a lot of the Scottish, the Anglo-Saxons. A lot of these people were Negro as well. So it's conjecture to say, he's white, half white or half Moorish, because, that side also is contested. He's already been described as black and dark already. We got his wife being called the Dark Lady. You guys starting to see the trend? It says here, History of the George Washington Bicentennial Celebration, Volume 1. This is from 1932. We're on page 225, Youth and Manhood of George Washington. It says here, the man himself, okay? Contemporaries of George Washington have commented that none of his portraits accurately resembled him. They don't resemble him. And a member of his immediate family is quoted as having said that picture of him painted by various artists all look very much alike, but are not really like the general himself. Do you see what they're telling you here? Who is that painting of? These body snatchers, whitewashed images. This is attributed to the fact that the expression of George Washington's face varied according to circumstances and the painter's side only in repose, right? So it's not him. His family members and all the people contemporary to his time are not describing him like that. A great similarity exists also in the word pictures penned by those who met George Washington at different periods of his life and under varying circumstances. One of the earliest of these depicts a handsome youth of 19, full height of 6 feet 2 inches, slender, blue eyes, an abundance of brown hair, and a clear, ruddy complexion. That does not mean white, so-called pale skin, or white man. That's the dodge to hijack. Ruddy, copper brown, reddish brown, copper, ruddy complexion. His manner self-control, his speech well considered. Okay, he's ruddy. All those paintings of him are not him. They are not really like him. They don't resemble him. And we're in the book here, George Washington, a biography. And this is by John R. Alden. And I'm on page 11 of this book. So they're going to describe George Washington in this book here. Says he had property, he had prospects, and he was physically attractive, 6 feet tall. He was lanky, like many other Americans, like Jefferson and Lincoln. All right, just like Lincoln. Remember what Lincoln looked like? All right, he had rather long and lean arms and thighs, and he was flat-chested. He had strong but quite regular features, except that the upper part of his nose was unusually broad. All right, unusually broad nose. His face, like so many countenances of his time, exhibited the marks of smallpox. He had light blue eyes, all right, light blue eyes and brown hair, and was a vigorous male. A British officer who met Washington some years later reported that he had a dark complexion and a foreign look. A dark complexion and a foreign look. That's George Washington, okay? So break the spell, you guys see? All right, he has Moorish blood. He's being described as being a so-called dark-skinned complexion man, and by his contemporaries, primary sources, as it says here, dark complexion man, so Swarthy. Can I get a so Swarthy George Washington from the Washington? So again, we got the Washington line here going all the way down to George, right, and Martha right here, as it says here with the X. This is his family line. His dad Augustine and his mom Mary Ball. So this is one line, and again his mom's line, the Ball family, as we can see here. Crest of Joseph Ball, Washington's grandfather. William Ball, Lord of Manor of Barkham. This goes all the way back to 1480. All right, Robert Ball, William Ball, and then goes all the way down to Mary Ball right here, mother of Washington. So I'm at this website, nps.gov, as a government website. It says here of National Park Services. It says George Washington, birthplace. Says the Washingtons in Virginia history. We're going to talk about the planter John Washington, right? So he was actually coming from England over there, and he decided to stay. He was like a merchant, a ship merchant, all right? And he decided to stay. He actually went to court, you know, because he had to deal with somebody else to go back, and he didn't go back. So he won, and he married the guy who helped him win, is Pope, Nathaniel Pope. And this is story says John Washington married Anne Pope, Colonel Pope's daughter, in 1658, and was given 700 acres of land on Mattox Creek, Colonial Beach, as a wedding gift. The land grew tobacco to use as money or sell. Tobacco was the cash crop on the plantation. Cattle, hogs, sheep, fowl, vegetables, crops such as corn were raised for food. The work on plantation required manpower, people for raising crops and caring for the livestock. Tobacco needed most manpower. It took one person to work 2 acres of tobacco. People were brought to Virginia from England, with their passage on ship paid by planters. The people brought over would have to work for 4 to 7 years for the planters and receive the freedom dues, a bushel of corn and suit of clothes. They were called indentured servants and were a cheap source of labor. All right, we're not talking about Africans. All right, the planters that paid the passage would receive 50 acres of land per servant or head, causing this to be known as the head right system. So they would get 50 acres for every servant they got. You see that? John Washington used the head right system for claiming land. This is your land, your ancestors' land, right? He paid the passage from England for 63 indentured servants brought to Virginia. Where he get his servants from? The Washington family? Europeans, not Africans. Indentured servants would never own any land in England. If they came to Virginia and worked for a planter for 4 to 7 years, the servants would buy their own land after their indenture. They had a benefit. It doesn't matter if they were convicts, they were whatever their situation was to get here as an indentured servant, they had the opportunity to also get your land. And possibly if they wanted to do their own indenture and their own head right grant or whatever. Land was plentiful and cheap. It was plentiful. They took it from the American indigenous people. It was plentiful and cheap. Come and get it. Come and get it. Land was the reason people came to Virginia. Land was needed to plant tobacco and make money. We got to make that money. We don't care if it's your resource. We don't care if it's the Great Spirit's land that it gave it to you. We don't care if it's your promised land. We need to make money. We got to plant tobacco. Again, so if they're telling us that in the Washingtons, his grandfather had, a European servants, what's all these people? All right, let's go back. All right, they showed us a different image earlier, you see. So are these Europeans right here? Because again, history, we're going to read this book. It says George Washington and the American Revolution, Kim Collier. And it's here, chapter 1, John Washington and Bacon's Rebellion. And in this book, it tells us a little bit of the same thing, a little bit more details when I read it here. It says their wedding gift of 700 acres. Remember, his Nathaniel Pope gave it to him as a wedding gift, his father-in-law, on the Mattox Creek from Nathaniel. John and Anne resided in Nathaniel's home until John built their own home on Mattox Creek. In 1659 and 1660, John purchased an additional 1,000 acres of Mattox Creek while taking advantage of the head right system that for every indentured servant as a Virginia landowner receives 50 acres. All right, he took advantage. I remember this is George Washington's grandfather. All right, John Washington. He was a owner, all right, of all these acres. He took advantage of the head right system. He got 50 acres per every servant he got. This forms of bonded labor was done by contract, usually 3 to 7 years, in exchange for transportation to America and necessities to workers. The main origin of people were white Germans, all right? White Germans, not Africans, but there were some black, English, and Scottish people, all right? So you're sure these are all white Germans? They weren't black Germans? Because remember what Benjamin Franklin told us, that all the Germans were Swarthy. So where you get these white Germans in this time, 1600s? If Benjamin Franklin told us in the 1700s that the Germans were Swarthy and the Scottish. So only the English were, he said, according to them. But we know they weren't. They were also Negro English. All right, so this is all conjecture right here. But letting you know, again, Europeans, not Africans, is the point. Some of these workers were really interested in getting into America, New World, and wanted to become established colonists. Ooh, you see, some of these were like, yo, when I'm done with my term, oh, I'm gonna become an established colonist. I'm gonna have my own farm and indentured servants. I'm gonna be a master. Take these Indians' land, just move them aside. Some servants were taken from their homeland due to political or religious reasons, and some of the indentured servants were convicts. Like I said, convicts. Then you can get your land if after you do your time. All right, let's go over there. Convicts. All right, so now we're at the George Washington Mount Vernon official website is mountvernon.org. All right, they have a whole library and history of, they keep all the records and all the history of George Washington. And this article in their website is called Servants and Marriage. I wanted to read this to you. It says several hundred hired and indentured servants, primarily men, but a few women as well, worked for George Washington for more than 40 years at Mount Vernon. While most of these individuals chose to work at Mount Vernon, there were a few who came unwillingly as convicts. Convicts, remember we got in the last video all these convicts they were dumping over here. They were really cheap, right? All these convicts they were dumping over here in the colonies, indentured servants. Most were of European background, though others had African and Native American ancestry. Oh, though others are what? We already know, right? What we do with this word, we cross it out. We cross that out. Dodge the hijack. You got to show me. You got to prove to me that's an African. You mean a Negro, so-called? You mean a person of color? And who? Oh, Indians, yeah. So most were of European background. So most of his servants were of European background. European background, the ones, all right, indentured servants. Do you understand? The history. They used to tell us, we used to always picture what? Look at this. This is what they always wanted us pictures. European servants he had. But they're always going to show you this. History was told to us in a different way than it actually happened. And indentured servants were in Washington's plantation, and they were mostly European background. And what? Aboriginals. So-called Native Americans, so-called Africans, right? They call you African today, and you're not. You're an American Indian.